Hi, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Staying Connected with Your Health with the Worcester Senior Center. I'm your host, Dr. Michael Hirsch, Medical Director of the Division of Public Health. And here we are with our April edition. So what does that mean? It's spring, and spring has sprung. We're really excited about the buds on the trees turning green and the crocuses and some of the early flowers coming out. It's a very exciting time. Almost every group of people around the world have celebrated April, in whatever hemisphere they're in, as kind of a time of rebirth. That's a little bit of what the Passover holiday is. It's a little bit about what the Easter celebration is about. It's about rebirth, a fresh start, cleansing yourself of past sins and problems and getting a fresh start. And of course we have Earth Day. There's so many things in that month of April that recognize that now we're in the time of the year where it's warm, it's much more fun, we can be outside. It's all really a very encouraging time of the year. So we'll talk a little bit about the encouraging things about April. There are some discouraging things about this particular April when it comes to public health, and I will talk about that a little bit, and a little bit of personal history about public health or health in general. So let me start by saying, I think I've told this story before. In the old Julian calendar, named after Julius Caesar, April was the first month of the year. April was like January is now. And it wasn't until the 1500s when Pope Gregory changed all of the calendars in Europe to the Gregorian calendar instead of the Julian calendar. But there were still some holdouts, especially in parts of France, where the people were celebrating April 1st like it was the first year of the new year. And those people were termed April Fools. That's how we get April Fool's Day, April 1. And ever since then, it's been a time for pranksters to play practical jokes on their friends, their enemies, their loved ones, or complete strangers. It doesn't matter. It's a very fun time if you're into that. I am not a practical joker. I hate that. And yet every single year for the 45 years I've been married to my wife, she gets me every single year. Every single year, she's very clever about it. You know, she won't make a big deal, and I'll think I've gotten through the day. I'm thinking about it all day, and then something will happen. She'll pretend that we got a call from somebody that we owe money, or somebody with, it's gentle. It's not like she pretends somebody was in a car crash or something. That's cruel. But she gets me all the time. And now my daughter, who's a clone of my wife, gets me as well. So I'm a little worried about my granddaughters, whether they're going to start getting me when they're a little older. They're only 2. That being said, that's what April 1st is about. April 2nd is National Autism Recognition Day. And autism is a ever increasingly diagnosed problem amongst our youth. Some people suspect it's overdiagnosed, but it definitely, I think, has been more and more defined so people recognize it more commonly. And of course, there have been a lot of conspiracy theorists out there that have been suggesting that it has something to do with our diet and processed foods, or our vaccinations. Our own Health and Human Services Secretary, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., is a believer in the connection between autism and vaccination, even though the paper that suggested that in the late 1990s has been totally debunked, and the scientist who suggested it has been defrocked, essentially banned from scientific community. That being said, one of the first things that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. did when he took office in the HHS was to reestablish an investigative panel to look into the connection between vaccinations and autism. I feel this is a real disservice to so many of the people out there who have faith in science, have faith in their doctors, have faith that vaccinations, which have been out there since the days of Louis Pasteur, are safe and effective. And I would urge you not to fall prey to that conspiracy theory. There are a lot of vaccinations that kids have to go through to get through life safely. And because some people have been doubting those requirements or hesitant about those requirements or actually resistant to those requirements, we're seeing outbreaks of diseases that we long thought we had conquered. So we're still dealing with a measles outbreak in Southwest United States. Texas, Oklahoma, Arizona, New Mexico have all had cases of measles in communities of people that have not paid attention to the vaccination. And this is a big problem, and it could get bigger if more and more people don't get vaccinated. We've also seen rising numbers of polio patients in the United States that also seem to have been totally eradicated by the year 2000, and now it's coming back. And it doesn't really peak until summer months, so we'll have to see where we're at as we approach the summer months, whether we see a number that spikes. And then pertussis has been a big problem here, even in the Northeast during the winter. Again, that's part of a 3-part vaccination that some people just have been resistant to get. And even if the number of percentage of children that are vaccinated falls from like 98% to 93%, boom, you can see these outbreaks. While I'm on the topic of outbreaks, we have seen a very tough flu season. It seems to now be on the crest so that we are seeing fewer cases. COVID, our old friend, we just celebrated, if you want to call it celebrating, I would say commemorating the 5th year anniversary of the beginning of the pandemic, still with us, and it still has, I would say significant numbers each week that are being recorded here in the Commonwealth. It's something that can be avoided if you keep up with your boosters, and booster compliance has been way down. It's in the 15 to 20% of the population. People have developed some natural immunity from getting COVID. Some people have gotten it 2 times, 3 times, 4 times. But the virus keeps mutating, and that's what we're going to have to figure out each year, is what strain is going to be the biggest problem, and how can we adjust the boosters or vaccinations to accommodate the changes that the virus will go through. And then the one that seems to be still on everybody's mind is the avian flu, the bird flu, H5N1. It has really affected 3 main animal populations, with a couple of peripheral ones coming into play as well. First of all, it's a bird flu, so it's mostly wild birds, flocks of geese, flocks of ducks, migratory birds, because these birds also serve as sometimes the food that is given to cattle in this country. Cattle have been infected. So livestock have been infected, and their milk, which they deliver, has also been infected. Fortunately, the process of pasteurization wipes out the virus from the milk. But if you're drinking raw milk or eating raw cheese, this is going to be a potential problem for you. So I would urge you not to take those products until we have a little better handle on what the bird flu is going to do. The bird flu, because potentially when a bird dies along the side of the road, if you happen to have a cat that wanders outside, cat population has been getting the bird flu, and it can make them quite sick. We haven't seen it yet in other animals, with the exception of a few. Raccoons have presented with evidence of bird flu. Now, we have testing for bird flu. It's a kind of a complicated process, but if you as a human being come in and you have respiratory symptoms and ache and fever like a flu patient, you usually get a bank of testing now that includes influenza A, influenza B, and COVID. If those are all negative and you are a livestock worker or somebody who's been recently in contact with dead birds, either as a hunter or a hiker or animal control officer or something like that, then there's an additional test that we send to the state lab in Framingham to look for the bird flu. And we don't have a vaccination, so to speak, yet, and certainly not in mass production, but there have been concerns about bird flu since 2005. So there are some vaccines out there that will do this. It's just we would not have enough to distribute this if it really hit the human population hard. So far, it's only hit humans that work with these animals. There's not been a single case of human-to-human transmission. The virologists that I spoke to a couple of weeks ago that work at UMass and at St. Vincent's are in agreement that they're thinking it will take several more mutations, probably a couple more years, before the avian flu figures out how to spread from human to human. So on a scale of 10, when I asked the group, what's your level of concern about danger to humans in the Commonwealth and the country, they said 3 out of 10. That can change. And that's one of the things that the Department of Public Health is very vigilant about. We know from the previous pandemic in 2020 that we're not going to get such great information out of Washington or the CDC this time around because of budget cuts. Whole swaths of scientists from the CDC and the NIH have been let go, including some of the ones that were responsible for really paying attention to outbreaks. So we have to do it ourselves here in Massachusetts. And fortunately, we have some brilliant minds that we can apply to this problem. And I would urge you on April 7th, if you're interested, at the 6:30 Worcester Board of Health meeting, which you can attend virtually, just look at the www.worcesterma.gov site and look under health. You can attend a lecture that's going to be given by a renowned virologist from Boston Children's Hospital named Dr. Ofer Levy, and he will be explaining to the Board of Health how vaccines work and a lot of the concerns that are had about the different kinds of virus threats that we're facing now in the United States. You know, amongst the other things that the current administration in Washington did by cutting USAID funding the group that was in charge of monitoring Ebola to make sure that Ebola stays in Africa, that group has been disbanded. So we've done a lot of things that I think are against the interest of the public and its health, and we're going to have to compensate. And fortunately, we have a large West African population here in Worcester, and they're going to have to be our early warning trigger if people are coming over getting sick, or if they hear back in Africa that Ebola has started to blossom again. It's been bad in the Congo, but it hasn't been as bad in some of the countries that it was back in 2014 when we had our own Ebola patient, Dr. Richard Sacra, who was doing mercy work in Liberia and caught the disease himself, and eventually was transferred back to UMass for his care. He just received the Lifetime Achievement Award from the Worcester District Medical Society for his tireless work in third world countries with problems like that. So I think the state of the public health as far as outbreaks go is cautiously optimistic, but we don't have the infrastructure in place to deal with a pandemic right now, and I don't know how rapidly we'll be able to gear up. We did, I think, a fine job during the original pandemic getting the mRNA vaccines out there by beginning of 2021, kind of 9 months. But whether we'll be able to do a similar response to avian flu or whatever the bug of the day is, well, maybe Dr. Levy will have some ideas about that. So tune into that. That's, again, April 7th, Monday night at 6:30. So what else can we talk about for the month of April? I already mentioned World Autism Day. There's some historic days that you should all kind of be aware of. Obviously, April 19th is the day that the shot heard round the world was fired in 1775. There's an argument about whether it was in Lexington or whether it was in Concord, but whatever it was not far from good old Worcester. In Worcester, interestingly, we had our own little revolution going on even before that in 1774. We refused to pay the king's taxes, and we developed a militia camp where the current common is, where we have our skating rink in the winter and our brown bag concerts in the summer. That was the spot where, if you had come in 1774, you would have seen a bunch of tents where the militia was working out, trying to protect the city hall from the king's tax collectors. So that was our version of the revolution. It was bloodless. It was threatening to be an insurrection, but we never pulled the trigger. Of course, once the war was officially started in Lexington and Concord, many, many Worcester folk volunteered to serve in the Continental Army. And that reenactment, if you are interested in this history, on the 19th, that takes place in Concord and in Lexington, is really fun. You'll see the redcoats marching, you'll hear the fife and drums, and you'll recognize how brave those revolutionary folk were, because they knew that they were, if captured, they could be hung as traitors. And they were taking on the most powerful army in the world, the most powerful and wealthy empire in the world. And even though it took them from 1775 all the way till 1783, we did it. We threw off the yoke of British rule and established a constitution. And we had a representative democracy, and it seemed that was a great template for other countries all over the world to imitate our Constitution. As I sit here today recording this show, we may be in the midst of what's called a constitutional crisis. The three branches of government, which were supposed to be equal and separate, the executive branch headed up by the president, the legislative branch headed up by both the Speaker of the House and the Senate Majority Leader, and then, of course, the Supreme Court, headed by the Chief Justice, were all supposed to be able to restrain any one of the other branches from getting too much power. But we're in a cycle now where the executive branch is trying to really challenge that and to try to take as much power as they can. And so it's a controversy right now to whether we should call it a constitutional crisis, but our executive branch has been checked by a number of court decisions that haven't allowed them to do what they wanted to do, and they're not obeying all of those courts. So it seems like the Supreme Court, which is going to come back in session first week of October, is going to be busy, because I think there are going to be a lot of suits and countersuits, and they're going to have to adjudicate the decisions and find out whether or not we're still in the framework of our founding fathers that beat off the British and started this crazy idea of a, Republican democracy. Republican with a little r, not the party. So that's an important date, the 19th. And on the 26th is a tragic date. It's a remembrance date for nuclear accidents, because that was the date that the Chernobyl disaster happened. And it's hard to believe it's been almost 30 years, and we're still seeing a swath of that part of the Soviet Union, the old Soviet Union, current Russia, that is uninhabitable. And it's still too radioactive to even go near without major protective equipment, et cetera. And they've already picked up strange mutations in the animals that continue to live there. It should be a cautionary tale. Now, it sounds like the Soviet Union maintenance of that plant was terrible, and their handling of the initial meltdown of some of the nuclear rods there was terrible. Because in other countries, France in particular, nuclear energy is like their main source of energy now. And they look at that as a green source of energy as opposed to our coal-based energy that we have here in the United States. Coal and oil, what we call fossil fuels, which unfortunately continue to threaten the country and the world because of the eating up of the ozone layer and the resultant changes in climate that we're seeing, with these horrific wildfires and massive tornadoes and melting of the glaciers and rising of the sea. They reported out recently that Hawaii was sinking much faster than they thought, and that they were worried that within 10, 15 years there'll be swats of Hawaii that will be underwater. So it's kind of a mess, isn't it? We had an expert on climate change from the CDC come and talk to the Worcester Board of Health about 7 months ago, and she just gave a wonderful talk with Dr. Judith Schechter. She probably is archived in that same website that I mentioned where Dr. Ofer is going to be talking on April 7th. You can find Dr. Schechter's old talk. And she just had her whole section laid off with the CDC budget cuts. And I don't know if it's going to be restored because when your motto as far as an energy policy is drill, baby, drill, that doesn't go well with some of the things that the CDC scientists were discovering about the threats of climate change. And climate change causes lots of health problems, lots of social problems. It affects the most vulnerable in our population, so socioeconomically, the poor folk, the folk that have already experienced racial disparities, but also the young folk. I mean, regardless of what their ethnicity or backgrounds are, kids don't have a lot of the protections or the reserve that adults do if there's problems with water supply, problems with excess heat. And I hope that we pull out of this nosedive that we're doing. So, as far as the things in April that I want to highlight, April 15th is Jackie Robinson Day. That was the day in 47, that Jackie became a Brooklyn Dodger. And for the next 10 years, he was like the equivalent now of Mookie Betts. He could steal bases, he could hit home runs, he was a terrific fielder, just a great all-around player, five-tool player. And he changed the course of American history because there were children playing in the streets all over the country that were imitating him, whether they were black or white kids. They were imitating his batting stance, imitating how he slid into base. And he was so brave and courageous in taking all of these hurled epithets coming from the stands and death threat letters coming to his home, and he persevered. And because he persevered, he opened the door for other African American players to come into play, and they were all brilliant players in those days. Larry Doby and Hank Aaron and Willie Mays and Frank Robinson, and as they came into integrate these individual teams that they joined, people started to understand how stupid it was to have ever segregated baseball that way. And I had the great honor as a junior journalist for my junior high school to interview Mr. Robinson. At that time, he had just retired, and he had joined a coffee company which was called Chock Full of Nuts. I think they still produce coffee. It was my dad's favorite coffee because he loved Jackie Robinson. And he was very, very gentle. I was taking notes feverishly and trying to get, quotes and some better idea of what it was like to endure all of the hatred that he had to on the baseball field. And he would slow down if my pencil point broke, that kind of thing, which not every person that I got a chance to interview did. So I revere that day, and it's something that now baseball does too, because everybody on that day wears number 42, and it's practically a national holiday, and it should be a national holiday. Baseball in general is like my jam. I adore baseball. So, when my parents came over from Europe after surviving concentration camp, they wanted me, and this is true for many, many Holocaust survivors who came to the States, They wanted their kids to be all American kids. They usually did not speak their native, whether it was German, Dutch, French, Scandinavian languages, whatever it was, they did not speak that. They did not teach us to be bilingual. So regretfully, I missed out on that. But that was because they wanted us to be all American. So they sent us to baseball camps and summer camps and basketball camps. They wanted us to be familiar and adept at all the American pastimes that there were. And I got sent to some really good summer camps where I learned how to play baseball, and it is definitely in my blood. I'm just so ecstatic whenever the season starts. So April is a big month for me. And you can imagine how I feel about our Woo Sox and Polar Park. What a gem, what a gift. And it is, it's something we all have to support. Go to games and buy the swag and follow the teams. You know, 2 or 3 of the people that are starters on the Red Sox this year were Worcester Red Sox first. That kind of pipeline is just amazing to see those young kids develop here in Worcester and then go up and be successful. It's just great. So I definitely would urge you to be a baseball enthusiast in this town, because you don't want that gem to be wasted, you know. I'm very happy that our hospital system at UMass has gotten very involved with some of their charities, and we are able to bring some of our chronically ill kids to the games. The Woo Sox have been great about that, and having visits from them to the hospital is also like one of the biggest kicks a kid could have. And I also want to say a word about the Worcester Bravehearts, who preceded the Woo Sox arrival. The Braveheart games that are held over on Fitton Field at Holy Cross are so much fun. And it's minor league baseball at its best. It is lots of events and giveaways and swag and all this other stuff. And I think everybody has a great time at those games. So I want to give them a shout out too, because they kind of built up the baseball fever, and it seems like the two teams can succeed in the same town, and that's a good thing. So there's also a date that I want to mention from a personal standpoint, April 12th. April 12th is this year, the 80th anniversary of the liberation of my parents' concentration camp. And in my family, that was a kind of a big celebration day ever since I can remember. Both my parents are gone now. It's been 80 years since their liberation. And they were liberated by the Canadian Third Army. And my mom, when she was liberated, because she had been trained as a nurse in the infirmary in her camp, was asked by the medical team that came into the camp from the Canadian Army to join the Canadian Army and go around and liberate other sub-camps around Holland and Belgium. And she did that for a year. She ended up with the rank of major in the Canadian Army, and she loved Canada for obvious reasons. She kind of learned how to speak English from the Canadian folk that she worked with, and she learned a lot about all different kinds. She learned a lot to drive a truck and a car because of her experiences in the Canadian Army. So to see us with a trade war with Canada, all I can say is I'm glad she's not here to see that, because she absolutely adored Canada. When my dad was still alive, the two of them would make a trip to Toronto to see another concentration camp survivor who settled up there. also visited Montreal, went to Niagara Falls, to the Canadian side. Canada is our friend. Since 1815, there's been a peaceful border between Canada and the United States. The longest border between two countries in the world that has been totally peaceful. And to see us stir up animosity where, when the national anthem is sung north of the border, there are boos, and when the Canadian anthem is sung south of the border, there are boos. This is not the way we should function. Canada has been an amazing ally of ours. They landed on Juno Beach in D-Day. They served in World War I at the Battle of Verdun. They helped rescue our prisoners in Tehran when the Ayatollah captured the embassy there. They pulled a fast one on the Ayatollah and helped to smuggle those prisoners out. If you ever go back to old movies, look for I think it was about 2010 movie called Argo with Ben Affleck. Canada is a wonderful ally, a great neighbor, and they have done nothing but stand up for liberty and against evil time and time again at our side. So April 12th, if my parents were still here, we would be having a big celebration for the 80th anniversary. And it's also the 80th anniversary of the death of FDR, because when my parents were liberated, the Canadian soldiers just got the word on the radio that FDR had died, and many of them were crying. And I think that this is an important year for these anniversaries, because the end of World War II in Europe was on May 7th, and then the end in Japan is going to be coming up on August 14th. And these are things that we have to recognize, because there are very few of those World War II vets left. Most of them are in their late 90s, even in their hundreds. And that war established so many norms for what is acceptable behavior for countries, and how the countries have to band together to support each other. And again, a lot of that infrastructure is being threatened, if not destroyed, by our current political environment. So April should be a month of rebirth. April should be a wonderful month where people are celebrating, the holidays in their religion that look at rebirth for the crucifixion and the rising up of Christ to wash away the sins of the world, to Moses getting the Israelites imprisoned as slaves in Egypt and getting them out of there, is what Passover celebrates. These are very important concepts, basic concepts of what we hope will actually happen in our lives. That maybe if we've made mistakes, maybe if we've lived in a way that we shouldn't have, that we can get a new start. And that's what a lot of our opioid recovery efforts are about, and trying to find shelter for the people without housing. It's all about, it's never too late to be reborn. So that's what I'm wishing for all of you listening today, is some kind of emotional, psychological burst of energy, feeling of starting again now that spring is here. And baseball is awesome. So thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the merry month of May. Take good care.